Welcome back to ARM Studios. I'm Jason Foster, the CEO of Ori Biotech. Joining me now is Bruce Thompson, who is the CEO of a brand new CDMO called Kincell. Welcome, Bruce.
Thanks, Jason. Pleasure to be here.
It'd be great to start out, Bruce, if you don't mind, with a little bit of your background, but a little bit of kind of the genesis of Kincell and why you guys started that business now a couple months ago. You're in business about 6 months or so, is that right?
Yeah, roughly 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm a PhD immunologist by training. I spent the formative years of my career in large pharma at Pfizer and sort of was a misfit for a long time as an immunologist in a development organization until in 2013, 2014, Pfizer in-licensed the CAR-T assets from Servier and Selectus, and suddenly being an immunologist in a development organization made a lot of sense. So I got back into cell therapy at that point and helped them develop their early allo CAR-T assets that later became the foundational IP for Allogene. From there, I spent a lot of time in early clinical manufacturing, first at Fred Hutch, and then in a couple of startups, one at Lyell Immunopharma, where I built early process and analytical development and GMP manufacturing capabilities, and then Resilience, where I moved into manufacturing services, again, focused on getting clients into the clinic so that patients could be treated with new and investigational drugs. So I've always been on the front end of the development spectrum. And so when we had the opportunity to build Kincell and carve it out of an innovator company, it was a great fit for me because we're focused on early phase clinical manufacturing, process and analytical development, and helping academic spinouts and young biotech companies mature their programs into the clinic.
You know, we talked a lot this week about manufacturing. We always do at cell therapy meetings. Why is it that, what isn't working really for manufacturing? We've seen incredible clinical efficacy, which you can't argue with, unbefore seen results from complete response and all the other sort of metrics we'd hope to see for cancer patients. But we're still struggling to get these products to scale, to treat lots of patients, to make them affordable and accessible. What is it that isn't working? What is it that we're not getting right yet in cell therapy manufacturing?
It's a little bit of an unfair question because we're comparing it to large molecules and small molecules, right? Which have had respectively a 30-year and a 60-plus year history.
Yep.
So they've had a lot of time and grade to figure out all the kinks and harmonize a lot of the processes. So I think one of the things that's not working for cell therapy is the lack of harmonization, right? There's lots of different cell therapies out there and there's lots of different ways to make them. And I think that inherently means there's lots of different unit operations, lots of different training, lots of different opportunities to make mistakes. And we just haven't had the time to perfect a lot of these things into common practice.
I agree with you 100%. The way I also talk about this issue is I think we as enabling technology companies, we haven't done our job very well in supporting the industry because everyone just, builds these walled gardens that don't talk to each other. There's no interoperability. It's all proprietary software, hardware. And, the real challenge for us at Ori and what we're trying to build is maintaining the opportunity to be flexible, to meet the needs of experts like yourselves who are developing these processes, but then also providing a pathway to scale and doing both those things at the same time. This idea of mass personalization. How do I make things widely available, high throughput, high quality, but also personalized for an individual patient? It's just not something we've done before.
Right.
And so I think that's one of the pressing challenges, I think, for the supporting industry around the therapy developers to really get that right.
Yeah, agree. And I think there's an incentivization problem, right? So if you think about academics and NIH funding, primarily focused on basic science, figure out the biology, don't necessarily worry about the downstream commercialization components.
Yes.
And so I think there's a lot of really, really good clinical science, but then it stops at a certain point.
Yes.
And so it's up to the rest of the field to sort of grab onto things and industrialize them. And that's happening in silos, to your point, and not always in a coherent way that can be linked as discrete unit operations that can then be put into a GMP-regulated manufacturing environment. So
it feels to me a little bit like we're building the bridge from both sides and they end up kind of not meeting at the middle.
A little offset.
Because I think just as you said, I talked to Isabelle Riviere, who was an SAB member for Ori until she recently joined Takeda from MSK, but she would say, the incentives for us as researchers, it's publications, it's grant money, it's PhD students. We've got to kind of replicate that model to continue funding the research. And the people funding that research don't necessarily they aren't pushing us to solve for manufacturing in 7 years' time or whatever the sort of number is. But I also equally have never met a PI who said, I don't really care if what I'm developing ever reaches patients. Like, we know that's why they're doing it. So, part of the next set of questions that I had for you is, how do we need to think differently maybe in CGT about, there was that traditional development model, focus on the science, get into the clinic, get first-in-man data, have good phase 2 results, sell yourself to Pfizer, go sit on the beach.
Right.
That model has worked very well for small molecules and biologics for a long time. But that kind of rush to the clinic without taking sight of manufacturability and commercial viability has proven to be a lost leader, kind of a path to nowhere for advanced therapies. So in your perspective, certainly in your seat at Kincell, you see a lot of these types of processes early. How are we fundamentally changing, or how do we need to fundamentally change the way we're thinking about that?
There's two ways to look at it. One, we often have clients and partners that come in and say, I want to get into the clinic quickly.
Yes.
Right? And that in and of itself means there's a particular barrier to entry around cost, around speed, around complexity.
Yep.
So there's one path that's quick and easy, and you may be able to get some clinical proof of concept data. The second path is more complicated because you need a commercializable path. And so if you take the first path, you have to sign up for the interval of time to fix the process and to industrialize it for commercialization. There are ways to circumvent that by thinking about comparability early. Mm-hmm. So you can build in retain strategies, you can build in a risk mitigation strategy for when I have to make a change. This is my comparability protocol, this is how we're going to run it. We can quickly operationalize it. Yeah. So I think that's the way a lot of companies need to start thinking about it, which is if I'm going to pick the quick path in, I have to accept the long-term consequences, and I'll pay for it on the back end for commercialization.
Yeah.
Or I can commercialize it up front, but it's going to cost more and take longer, and I need to ensure I have the runway financially to be able to do that.
And I think you hit on it earlier with the kind of misaligned incentives. So I recently published an article with Sanjay Srivastava from Accenture talking about the new economics of cell therapy, and that what you've just described, that first path can often be developing into a dead end where actually I can't really go backwards easily and sort that problem out, even though I sort of made a conscious decision to rush into the clinic. And in this article, we really sort of were imploring investors to rethink about the investment model, to say an extra year maybe invested with an expert CDMO developing a manufacturability process that can get you to commercial scale, that has a reasonable cost of goods potentially, is well worth the investment, rather than just, again, rushing into clinical trials as fast as you can. Because I think that, as we've seen, unfortunately, the worst case scenario is, what we've seen with Bluebird and others, incredibly efficacious, therapeutic, big unmet need for patients, go all the way through the development process, get to the end of the line, trying to get access, trying to provide access for patients, and coming up to a roadblock at the end, not being able to be reimbursed and having to pull the product, in this case, out of Europe.
Right.
And so patients can't get access, bad for payers, bad for healthcare systems, bad for patients, and bad for developers who've spent all that money to get there and then ultimately can't commercialize.
The hard part is if you rewind and say, how much would it have cost in time and money to do it in a way that is commercializable, it may not have been that much.
No.
But market conditions, time to clinic, time to commercial, those are all considerations that, by and large, over the last 3 or 4 years, new leadership teams have had to deal with.
Yes.
And they weren't prepared, to make those decisions. They didn't have the experience. They didn't have all the data. So a lot of times they went straight into the clinic, they got some efficacy, and then their board said, okay, commercialize that. And it wasn't until they got to the end that they realized it wasn't ready.
They were stuck.
So
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. And so how do you see the role of CDMOs like Kincell in helping therapy developers kind of create a process that's manufactured, but also maybe have these discussions with their investors, with the market, to take the right amount of time and invest the right amount of effort in these kind of activities to get the long-term payoff? Because everyone wants the same result, which is broad access, big clinical impact, return on investment. It's just maybe an alternative path to get there.
There's multiple routes to get there for sure. I think the role for CDMOs in the space of emerging cell therapies is to be an expert partner, So one of the things that's really tough is if you think about an organization that has to do discovery, they have to do translation, they have to do CMC development, they have to do clinical, they have to do post-clinical biomarkers, they have to do everything, They also have to raise money. They have to build SG&A. They have to be really good at everything.
Yep.
And so one of the ways that CDMOs can really help is to be a partner and take that CMC burden off.
Yep.
Right. So if you can engage early enough with a company like Kincell, we can build your CMC roadmap. We can do your process and analytical development, and we can do your manufacturing.
Yep.
And so you now only need to invest in a small sort of expert CMC small team to help guide that work instead of building a large, expensive organization to do a lot of the early work and then tech transfer it to a partner anyway.
Yep.
And spend a lot of money on top of that. So I think the role of the CDMOs in this market is evolving to become more of an expert in our areas of expertise. Analytical development, process development, GMP manufacturing. And that will reduce the burden financially for a lot of new companies. And that should allow them to move faster into the clinic. Mm-hmm. Do what you're good at, discovery, construct development, clinical design, and let that CMC piece be left to people that do just that portion.
And to focus on it early. Even if you have to outsource it,
yeah.
Focus on it early in preclinical and R&D and sort of making sure that you have you're not developing a process that ultimately is going to leave you stranded on that side of the bridge that doesn't reach, where you're trying to go.
Yeah, it's funny. I've had a lot of conversations this week, and the one extreme is we want to be in the clinic in a year, and you walk through the timelines, and it's near impossible because they haven't even defined the construct.
Ticked a few of the boxes that have to be ticked. Yeah.
I talked to a person this morning, really refreshing conversation. Hey, we want to be in the clinic in 2026.
Right.
Like you're starting at the right time, having the right conversations,
you're realistic, yes.
Mapping it out. Yeah, and you've prepared the board correctly.
Yep.
They understand the expectations. They're going to ask you to accelerate, but at least you started from the right point, which is to do it right. We need this much time.
Exactly.
So I think the industry's learning, and I think there's a lot of room for companies like Kincell and other early stage focused CDMOs to really help the market move forward.
It's really important to afford the industry the opportunity to get the best of breed expertise. Maybe they go to a CDMO that has that specific expertise. They might choose technology providers that allow them the flexibility to develop their process. If they have a digital platform that underpins that, as we do in Ori, because we think it's important for ultimately getting to scale. So you don't have to start on paper.
Right.
You know that you can get to batch release by exception if you want to, or continuous validation processes, not only while you're learning and developing your process, but ultimately with scale in mind. At the end of the day, again, we're all trying to accomplish the same goal, which is get these products to patients, have them be affordable and accessible, not just approvable by the regulator. I wanted to ask your opinion about sort of, obviously the CDMO business traditionally has been kind of highly knowledge intensive, a lot of kind of highly experienced people really helping hands-on in a really kind of human labor sort of way. How are you thinking about the role of technology, automation, digitization for your business, but also for the therapy developers that you serve?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of technology development happening right now. And if you look, I'm not a student of history, but I enjoy learning about the early days of different industries, semiconductors, biologics, small molecules. A lot of these really took off when there was a harmonization of the manufacturing processes.
Yep.
We don't have that yet.
Not yet.
We have a lot of technologies that are coming in and they're serving needs in the manufacturing process, but they're not linked together correctly. So digitization is very important to be able to look upstream and downstream and understand the inputs and outputs. And then to your point, port that to an electronic batch record or an electronic quality management system so you can do review by exception and you can get these autologous patients their therapeutics much faster. And I think that's true for a lot of the unit operations. So CDMOs need to embrace that new technology and they need to start to think about, for each of the unit operations, what are the best pieces of technology to plug into those buckets, if you will, so that they can create a seamless process.
Absolutely. And I think I was just talking to Matthew Hewitt about this as well, to say it's incumbent upon us as enabling technology providers and innovators to have that sort of open architecture approach, right? So, we think about the Ori platform as an ecosystem. So we can plug into MES systems, e-batch record systems, electronic lab notebooks, COI, COC software. It's not your responsibility. We've hoisted that responsibility onto CDMOs and therapy developers. Say, here's the technology, sort it out. That's not helping. If we were able to do some of the heavy lifting ourselves and say, okay, we're going to work with TrackCell, we're going to work with Benchling, or we're going to work with Apprentice, and we're going to make sure that our systems work together, And then we're going to look upstream maybe to tools like the Lovo or the MaxSite or a suite of products to say, how do we integrate those things? How do we help them work together? Can I give you a protocol that says, okay, Bruce, we thought about this a little bit, apply a little bit of gray matter to say, this is, if you want to put these things together, this is how you do it. And I think that is the minimum sort of requirement for the kind of enabling technology providers in this space.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to enable, because I think what happens a lot of times is you get a platform that's available and it's tweaked to one particular element.
Right.
And then as a CDMO, we have to hire, a resource-intensive group that are going to do all the configurations.
That's right, to try and tweak it to what you need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think if you look at a lot of the common work processes, there should be a stable of these pieces off the shelf that say, for a vanilla CAR-T, for a vanilla NK, for an iPSC, there's at least a starting point, and now you're just tweaking, to your point, instead of de novo creating.
And to build inherent flexibility into these systems, these platforms, because the problem with, let's say, first generation technology is that most of it wasn't built for this field. It's been adapted. But also when you make too specific a set of design decisions, you then eliminate flexibility.
Yeah.
And that's what someone like yourself needs, because you're developing completely new processes with completely new cell types, new reagents, new IP, and you need that flexibility. And then if you do the work, you don't want to have to change it fundamentally at every stage and to get it to scale. So.
And the other challenge for a CDMO is that we don't have the same type of therapeutic coming in every time. So, we need that flexibility because we have 7 different processes coming in because there's 7 different therapeutics. The more these can be a bit plug and play, and we can say, okay, a washing element requires X, Y, and Z, an expansion element requires A, B, and C.
Yeah.
We can plug in the details, but not have to essentially configure the entire back end.
Yeah.
The faster we can move and the more flexibility it gives us.
There's a lot of reinvention of the wheel happening. It feels like at every stage we have to sort of reinvent the process,
Agree.
Which is definitely not saving us time and money. Well, thanks so much, Bruce, for visiting us today, and welcome to the Ori Strategic Advisory Board. We're very happy to have you join as part of the broader Ori team, and looking forward to working together over the coming years.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Really enjoyed the conversation. Absolutely looking forward to joining the strategic board and helping kind of provide the insight from the experience I've gained over the last 10 plus years in the space. So
Fantastic. Thanks again.